Welcome back. This is LA Rathbone, Part 8 of Slackware Series 2, Usage and Configuration. My 15-minute limit on YouTube is gone. I think it has been for some time, but it's gone now, so I'm not going to bother with that on this episode. I'm just going to go till I'm done. This episode is going to be on networking. I can't possibly talk about every single concept that everyone's going to want to hear about, but I'll try to do my best to explain how Slackware expects you to set up your network. I'm not going to be able to talk an awful lot about specific hardware issues because, well, to be honest, it really depends on your hardware. Like a big problem people have with wireless cards, for example, it's getting their hardware running, but there's not an awful lot I can do about that unless I know what your card is. But you're better off just doing some Google searching for that, unfortunately. But I'll talk a little bit about that to the extent that I can, based on my own setup. So I'm in my virtual machine here. Let's delay talking about wireless till the end. Let's talk about just basic networking in Slackware, how it kind of all works. So now, like any system, Slackware has a series of init scripts, and those init scripts or initialization scripts run at various times. On Slackware, they're all located in the etc/rc.d directory. You'll see a number of them here. Based on our ls colors, you'll see that some of them are executable and some of them are not. If you're thinking back to our first episode, you'll notice that when we enabled a service at the beginning, it was executable, and where sendmail we did not enable during the installation process, that's not executable. That's not a coincidence, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But if you caught that, you give yourself a nice gold star. But before we even look at these, we have to ask ourselves, well, how does the system even know that these exist? How does it even know to run these? I mean, we could have called rc.s rc.foobar. It doesn't matter. It's arbitrary. These are just the names that Slackware gave them. But the system needs to know how to find these. So the way it does that is the init program. And the init program is the mother of all processes. It's the process that starts the whole ball rolling with respect to getting the system up and running, shut down, switching between run levels, and so forth. So let's look at the configuration file for init. I'm looking at it as my normal user because I really don't want to make changes to this file right now, and I don't want you guys to either because it's a very delicately put together file and you don't want to change it, otherwise you could have your system unbootable. So I'm going to look at it. We're just going to look at it as our normal user. So basically, the format of this file is you start with an ID, which is just an arbitrary identifier for the line itself, but it needs to be unique. So what they did was for the first line in the file, they called it ID for the initial run level or the initial default or whatever you want to call it. And the next thing in there is the run level to which it applies. And then the next thing after the colon is the action upon which it actually does that thing. And then if you put something after the final colon, that's the command that will be run in that set of circumstances. So here, this line just sets the default. It's kind of a special setup. It just sets the default run level on Slackware to 3. If you wanted to set it as single user mode, you'd set it to 1. It's warning us that we're changing a read-only file. Who cares about that? We don't want to change it anyway. And if you wanted a GUI to start up by default, you change it to 4. Now we're not going to do that. We're going to leave it as 3, but that's just how you would do that. Next line, this is a very important line. Basically, upon an initialization of the system, it will run etc rc.d rc.s. I don't believe this s is necessary. I think they could have had the line looking like this and it would have worked just as well. That being said, I don't recommend that you try that. I haven't actually tested that theory out, but I don't think that you'd need that line because when the system is initializing, it's initializing, and there's no the run level wouldn't really be a relevant consideration at that point in time, just because the script on Slackware happens to be rc.s, doesn't mean you have to put s there, but we'll leave it. And then if you're going into single user mode, I don't think you need that s there. I think you probably could have left it as 1. But let's not test that theory for now. Okay, on run levels 1 and s, you run etc rc.d rc.k, and the wait means don't do anything else in init until that's done. Okay, so it doesn't go on to the next line until that's done, if you're on one of these 2 run levels. So on this boot we were not, so it would have skipped right to this line, and it would have run rc.m, and that would be, of course, after running rc.s. Even though they have that redundancy in there, that would have run on our boot anyway, because that's the way it works. So it would have run the rc.m command, and that is on run levels 2, 3, 4, or 5. Okay, so pretty much any run level except for like your shutdown, your halt run levels, and including your GUI run level, it runs this as well. So this is the one that takes you into multi-user mode, and we'll take a little look at that later. Some special actions are set here. If you do Control-Alt-Delete, what does the system do? Well, it reboots, and it reboots by way of this command here. Okay, again, run level 0. If you go into that run level, you halt the system. Run level 6 reboots the system using rc.0 and rc.6 respectively. I'm not really familiar with these lines here. They're special lines. I wouldn't change them. Just power-related things. Now, this is basically respawn means if the command ever dies, run it again. So in any run level, we want to start a console. Okay, we want to start a console, which is like, again, we can tab between them using Alt F1 and Alt F2 and so on and so forth. Oh, I see. Okay, I'm in my second terminal for some reason. I don't really know why, but anyway, I'm not going to worry about that. So, and if any of these consoles ever died, then they'd be respawned. Okay, these are all commented out. Don't worry about these. And this is, if you're in run level 4, what it then does is it runs rc.4, which in this case, it runs your graphical interface login manager. And if it ever dies, it reruns it again. So that's why you have that respawn there. And this is why order matters in this file. A lot of people don't think that order matters in the init tab, and to a certain extent it doesn't. But when it comes down to certain things, it does matter. So in this case, we need to have this line towards the end. If we moved this respawn line up to, let's just say, prior to this line here, then it would try to run your graphical user interface before you have anything else, any of your other multi-user things going on in your system, and that would not be a good idea. So that needs to stay at the end. Okay, let's quit this with an exclamation mark to just get out of it. We don't want to save any of our changes. Okay, so that tells us something. That tells us that we have rc.s anytime we start our system. Let's take a quick look at that. It does a bunch of things. It mounts our proc file system. It sets our path. It does lots of very important things that need to happen to get a basic sane system going. Don't worry about exactly what it means. You can always poke around at it later if you're curious, but I wouldn't change it unless you really know what you're doing. rc.m. Here's where we go multi-user, and a bunch of things happen here. Okay, so, but the main thing that happens is where are we here? A bunch of services get started. Okay, so your networking gets started, and a bunch of other things happen. Send mail. see what it does here. You see is it checks to see if any of these rc.whatever files are executable, and then then checks for that and it runs them if they are. So if I added a random init script in there, like called etc rc.poprox, and I got to do a bunch of things and made it executable, it wouldn't work because they're all specifically enumerated in this file. So you'd have to either edit this file, which is not recommended, or you'd add it to rc.local, which is meant to be edited. So that's where you do that. I won't get into that right now, but that's basically how that works. But I'm getting off topic as I am wont to do. The main thing we need to worry about, is the fact that here's where it runs some script to initialize our networking hardware, and then it runs another script to start our networking daemons. I'm not too worried about our inet.2 because our daemons are our daemons, and if they're configured properly, as long as our device is up and running, that should work fine. So we want to focus on configuring our networking hardware. So it's inet1 that we want to be concerned with. Let's quit this. Let's switch to root. Actually, let's not switch to root. Let's just take a look at our rc.inet1.conf file. Oh, I thought my instinct was serving me correctly. We do need to be root. Ugh, come on. One of these days I'm going to get locked out of my own system because I'm always typing my password wrong. So we could look at the rc.inet1 file. All you really need to know is that it gets all of its configuration from inet1.conf. There's lots of documentation on this. I'm not going to waste any more time looking at this script. Just be aware that inet1.conf is what you need to edit for that. I'm not going to go through the whole script right now. So let's go to the top of the file. This is my virtual machine. So on my virtual machine, I have a hardwire, like an Ethernet wired networking device, and it works fine. It was auto-configured, auto-detected, and so forth. And for most desktop PC users, that will be the case. And Slackware will, when you're configuring your network upon install, will then do all these things here, and set DHCP 0 to yes, and so on and so forth. And this is basically a sane default, which says take your ETH0 device, which is the first Ethernet device that your system detects, and enable DHCP on it, and just basically configure it automatically. If you have a router with DHCP capabilities, that should work fine. So on this virtual machine, I'm going to leave it. I don't have any other devices, so I'm not going to configure devices that I don't even have. If I wanted to, I could turn off this option. I believe that would be enough, and then don't even bother starting up ETH0 at all by setting this to blank, and then use Network Manager in KDE to just configure my network once KDE is up and running. And that's an option for desktop users. That's definitely an option, but for server environments and anything like that, I would not go that route. I would configure it this way using Slackware's tools, so that you don't even have to have a graphical interface running to use your network. And I know Network Manager has other ways of doing things in the command line, but I'm not going to get into that. So that's how you configure your basic network on a regular desktop system or virtual machine. Now, if I scroll down here, here's where am I here? Aha, here's my example configuration for a wireless network. Here is what the default inet1.conf looks like on a standard Slackware system. So I'm going to take a pause break and switch over to my other machine, which is at my office. So I'm going to SSH into it. So I won't be able to go through all the steps, but I'll show you what I did to get my wireless up and running on that machine. So I'm going to take a pause break, and meet you back here. All right, we're back. And now I'm not using a virtual machine anymore. I'm now using a console on KDE, which is SSH'd into my office computer, which is in another city from where I am right now. So I don't have physical access at this time. So I don't want to bring down my network or anything like that because, well, if I do that, I won't be able to use this console anymore. So I'm gonna have to just kind of show you what I did to get it up and running. On this computer, I'm going to use LSPCI to show you what I have. I have a Broadcom PCI wireless device. It's on a desktop machine. But you can still use LSPCI on your laptop to see what your wireless device is, even if the module or the driver is not loaded. So that's how you would go ahead and do that. In order to get my device up and running, it wasn't just enough to have the wireless driver for Linux, which did exist and was part of the kernel, but I also needed the firmware. And if you look at lib firmware, you'll note that, let me pipe it through less. You'll note that there's a whole whack of stuff here. Okay, a lot of that comes with your system, but I needed to install the B43 driver, which did not come with Slackware. So I needed to go and download the driver, extract it, and place it into lib firmware B43. And if we take a look at what's in there, there's a whole bunch of FW files. And once I did that, my wireless card was then able to be configured properly. Now, there's really no way for me to tell you specifically what to do for your hardware. If it's not working out of the box if you're not able to run ifconfig, WLAN 0, and all the following commands that I'm going to show you, well, you're just going to have to run LSPCI, copy and paste the name of your device, and search Google on another machine and see what you got to do to get it running. Because if UDEV is not loading your modules, it could be a firmware issue, or it could just be that your driver is just not supported on Linux, and you may need to go another route, such as NDIS wrapper, or if there's something else current today. I don't know. I haven't used NDIS wrapper in some time, but back in the day, that was a useful program that lets you run Windows wireless drivers on Linux. So that might be something you'll need to look into. But I didn't need to do that. I just needed my firmware, and I needed to install it properly, and then my device worked. If I run ifconfig, you'll see that WLAN 0 is up. If I just sort of got my device up and running, what I may have needed to do is run ifconfig WLAN 0 up, because it might have just shown the low, which is the loopback device, which is not an actual networking piece of hardware, and it might not have shown WLAN 0. So you'd have to do that to get it up and running, and then you'd run iwlist, which is a wireless tool, the device name, and then scan. It's gonna give us a huge list of text that's not parsable, so I'm gonna put it into the less, pipe it to less, using the pipe key again just above the backslash. You'll see scan completed. We can scroll up and down in this file now and in our less pager, and it found a bunch of networks. So in order to find the one I want, I'm going to use / to search for ESSID. HCR mil, that is the office next door, not mine. But you'll note that it's running WPA, which is better than what mine's running. My office is only running a WEP secured network, which is not great, but I didn't set it up. It's not my router, so not really my place to do that. But we've never had an issue, so I guess until then it's not going to change, but whatever. Mobile health, not mine. Grain exports, not mine. Main Street, that is mine. So you'll note that it says that encryption key is on, but there's no mention of WPA. So don't quote me on this, but I think it's safe to assume that means it's WEP. And in this case, it is WEP. I know that it is. So that's what I need to do. I need to configure ESSID as Main Street, and I need to configure using a WEP password. And I know what the WEP password is in this case. It's 510 times. Okay, so in order to set that up, I always recommend using WPA supplicant anytime you're using a secured network, even if it's WEP. The reason being that if your network ever drops out, WPA supplicant is able to then restart it. And I don't mean DHCP connectivity. I mean the actual device being connected to the wireless point of contact. And that's an important distinction to make, because I was having an issue for a while where I'd had my network set up using the Slackware configuration tools, and I set my ESSID and WEP key using inet1.conf specifically, but my network would every couple of weeks or every few days, depending on the situation, would drop out, and I'd have to physically restart it again, and it was getting really frustrating. And I knew that there had to be a way to get around that, and the answer was that use WPA supplicant. Okay, even if you're using WEP, so that's why I'd highly recommend that. So let's start with that file. If we look at wpa-supplicant.conf, the default on Slackware will only have these two lines on there. Leave them as is. Feel free to add this line if you wish. Basically, it is if you decide to use the GUI tool for WPA, you can then change some settings using the GUI, but you need update config equals 1 for that tool to actually change the contents of this file. So feel free to add that in there, but if you're going to be just doing things manually, don't bother. But it can't hurt to have it in there. Because this is a WEP device, I sort of need to set it up manually. There's no real tool to kind of help me out to get this information. So network curly brace equals curly brace, and then SSID equals Main Street. Key MGMT equals none. That's because I'm using WEP. If you don't specify that, it defaults to WPA. Maybe if I kept that out and put WEP key equals the WEP key, it would know I'm using WEP, and I wouldn't need that, but I'm not going to test that theory right now. I would put that in there if you are using WEP. And then WEP key 0 equals the WEP key. Okay? Now, that's what you'd need to do for that. Now, if you were using WPA, there's a nice little script that can help you called WPA passphrase, and if we run that, it tells us how to use it. You'd use let's just say we had a password for Main Street, and let's just say the password was password, okay, which is 8 letters, which is enough for a WPA key. So you'd run WPA passphrase Main Street and then password, and it creates an entry there for you that you can then append to etc wpa-supplicant.conf. Now if we edit that file, you'll see we've got our WPA entry for Main Street, but that's not what the password is for Main Street. I'm going to delete that, but that's what you would do if you were running WPA, and of course you'd replace your SSID and password with the appropriate entries for that. I'm going to save that again. Now we need to go to etc rc.d. Let's take a look at our rc.inet1.conf file. If I go to the top of the file, I've disabled my ETH0 device. So if I run ifconfig, you'll see that I've only got WLAN 0 and low. I do have an ETH0 on this machine, but I don't want it to even run that because I don't want to confuse anything. I just want to keep it simple. I don't use that, so I don't want to have it showing. So don't worry about any of these ones because I don't have those devices on my machine. And here's where we start the configuration for WLAN 0. And remember when I showed you the example config with all those commented lines? Well, here is an example of my working configuration. So if name for WLAN 0, keep that the way it is unless you know what you're doing, unless you know it needs to be otherwise. You will not likely need this line. This is another one of the reasons why I couldn't use I'm not sure if I mentioned the WICD or the Wicked tool. I think I may not have mentioned it in this this recording, but people may be wondering why I don't use Wicked and I'm using the default tools. Well, for one thing, I mean, there's plenty of tutorials on using Wicked, so you could always look at that. It's not Slackware specific. If you're interested in Wicked, it's available in the extra directory on the Slackware FTP servers. But a big thing I needed to do on my server is request a specific IP address from my router, because the router doesn't support assigning static IPs to specific devices. But it does support requesting an IP address. The DHCP server on the router does support requesting an IP address from the originating device. So I want it always to be 199, so that when I'm opening ports and so forth, I don't have to keep changing it. It's just always going to be 199. So that's the way that I would like it to be. So you probably won't need that line, however. Now, DHCP4 for WLAN 0, that is set to yes. And I know it's kind of confusing that it's called 4 and yet it's WLAN 0, but that's simply because in the old days, Slackware didn't support giving an if name to your device. Every device was ETH, ETH, and then a number. But they've changed that since then. But the old relic of keeping a number for the device has remained in force, so you have to watch out for that. I just want to use DHCP, and I didn't specify. I used to. You'll see that I used to have it in there, and I commented out. I'm not going to specify the ESSID or the key, because if you're using WPA supplicant, that's all found from that. So I don't need to put that in there. And all these other things too, I'm just going to leave the defaults in place and not override them with any sort of custom setup. This is very important. WLAN WPA 4 equals WPA supplicant. Because if I didn't have that, it then would not know to look to WPA supplicant and run the proper commands. So make sure you keep that on there. And leave this commented out unless you're using NDIS wrapper, because the default will be WEXT if you don't specify anything here, which is what most of us will want to use, okay, for Linux supported wireless cards. Switch it to NDIS wrapper if you are using NDIS wrapper, but we're not doing that here. That's all I need. Done. So in order to get that device up and running, you've probably already got the networking started if you're running your system. So what you could do is rc.inet1 restart, or stop or run stop and then start again. But that restarts all of your devices, all of your networking. That's not really necessary. That used to be the only way you could do it in Slackware. You had to kind of turn them all off and turn them all back on. But they've improved the script since then. Now you can specify the device, in this case WLAN 0 _ and then we can run stop. Well, in this case you'd probably want to start with start, but it doesn't hurt to run stop. Stop, you can run start, and you can run restart if you need to restart the device. But for now, I would run, you might as well run restart and hit enter. And hopefully by that point your device would be up and running. But again, for 99% of people that want to run a desktop system using Slackware, which seems to be what most people want to do, because a lot of the questions I'm getting on the comments relate to desktop systems. So if you're running a desktop system, I would just use Network Manager and KDE, and your device will just work. That is assuming that you get your hardware issues sorted out, which again is not really something I can talk about in this video. So you have to just do some Googling if you're having an issue with your wireless card. And again, LSPCI will tell you what your card is, and I guarantee you if you're having issues, other people have too. So you can search Google on another machine and see what the issue is. I had to, on mine, again, the Broadcom, I needed to get the B43 firmware on another machine, and what I did was I put it on a USB key and stuck the key in my system, and I then installed the driver, the firmware rather, by that means. So that is something you can do. So that concludes my video on networking in Slackware. I believe that's part 8 of the Slackware Series 2. In the 9th and potentially final episode, of course, if I discover things that I need to talk about, I can always add them to the series later, but what I'm going to do is get a lightweight desktop running using Window Maker. Now, we've already taken a look at Window Maker, but I'm just going to get a few other things up and running because people seem to be concerned about the desktop. So I will do that using Window Maker on the next episode, and we will play around with that a little bit. So that's all for this episode. This is L.A. Rathbone signing off. Good night and good luck.